Stolen Legacy, Part 5. The so-called books of Aristotle deal with scientific knowledge which was not in circulation among the Greeks, and consequently it was impossible, as has already been stated, for him to have purchased them from other so-called Greek philosophers. It is for the purpose of concealing the true source of his books and of his education that history tells us very strange stories about Aristotle. A, that he spent 20 years as a pupil under Plato, whom we know was incompetent to teach him, and B, that Alexander the Great also gave him money to buy the large number of books to which his name has been attached, but at the same time fails to tell us when, where, and from Aristotle brought the books. Furthermore, as already pointed out, Aristotle's review of the doctrines of all previous philosophers, including Plato, together with his exposure of their errors and inconsistencies, show that he had become confident not only of the fact that he was in possession of correct knowledge, one that had not before been made available to the Greeks, but also that he could then speak with great authority. B, the lack of uniformity between the list of books points to doubtful authorship. There are at least 3 lists of books. One list is said could be Aristotle's own classifications of his writing, and naturally it must be dated within the period of his own life, 384 through 322 BC. In this list, Aristotle has told the world that he has wrote texts on A, mathematics, physics, and theology, B, ethics, economics, and politics, and C, poetry, art, and rhetoric. Now, in order to write these texts, one must have received his education and training in the subjects on which they are written. We are told in the history of Greek philosophy that Socrates taught Plato and that Plato taught Aristotle, but there is no evidence that Socrates ever taught mathematics or economics or politics. Consequently, it was impossible for him to teach Plato these subjects, and also impossible for Plato to teach Aristotle these subjects under the Egyptian mystery system, which was graded and which required proof of efficiency before promotion. We are therefore unable to accept the claim of Aristotle to have been the author of these books. 2 lists are derived from different sources, and the 2 together differ widely in A, number, B, subject matter, and C, date. The list of Hermippus and Alexandrine, 200 BC, contains 400 books. The list is compiled by Ptolemy between 1st and 2nd centuries AD, contains 1,000 books. The very fact that there is no uniformity in the list points to a doubtful authorship. Also, if Aristotle in 20 BC had only 400 books, by what miracle did they increase to 1,000 in the 2nd century AD, or was it forgery? C, the discrepancies and doubts in his life. He wastes 20 years as a pupil under Plato. It is said that when he and Plato at the age of 19 and spent 20 years with him as a pupil, this is doubtful and unreasonable. Doubtful because Plato is regarded as a philosopher, while Aristotle as a scientist, who has been credited with all of the scientific knowledge of the ancient world, and it is impossible for a master to teach a pupil what he himself does not know. It is also unreasonable to expect a man who has been credited with Aristotle's knowledge to waste 20 years of his best life under a master who was incompetent to teach him. He is said to have received financial aid from Alexander the Great and was able to purchase a large number of books in order to advance his study. And this is the truth of how he got such a large number of books, which is misrepresented. But this sounds more like a fable than truth, for up to the time of Aristotle, Greek education was represented by the sophists, who taught rhetoric and dialects, while the study of elementary science was confined to a few unknown philosophers. This was the standard of Greek education, for the sophists were the only authorized teachers. Yet Aristotle is credited with producing 1,000 different books dealing with all branches of scientific knowledge of antiquity. Certainly he could not have obtained them from the Greeks, for the vast body of knowledge which bears his name, which he presented as new, would really have been the traditional common possession of all who were members of the Greek schools of philosophy, for they would have been the only persons inside of Greeks permitted to own such books, for knowledge was protected as a secret. Under these circumstances, it is evident that the vast body of scientific knowledge ascribed to Aristotle was neither in the possession of the Greeks of his time, nor was there anyone in Greece competent to teach him science, and least of all on so vast a scale. He got the books by looting the library of Alexandria. The question must be asked, how did Aristotle, a single individual, come to possess such a vast number of scientific works, a body of knowledge which took the ancient world 5,000 years or more to accumulate? It is evident that Aristotle's fame as a scholar has been grossly exaggerated, for such an accomplishment would have been both a physical and mental impossibility. Throughout the intellectual advancement of man, the world has witnessed many a genius, but those have always been specialists in the particular fields, not specialists in every branch of science. And the modern world is no exception, for our great men of science are not specialists in every branch of science, but only in a particular one. That appears to be nature's way. As a matter of fact, the many discrepancies and doubts in the life and activities of Aristotle leads us to the only reasonable solution of the problem, that instead of the tales, A, Alexander the Great gave him the money to buy books, B, that he spent 20 years of his life as a pupil with Plato, and C, that he left the palace of Alexander for Athens when Alexander started on his Egyptian invasion, he, on the contrary, must have spent a large part of those 20 years under the tutorship of the Egyptian priests, and also must have accompanied Alexander on the Egyptian invasion, which gave him the opportunity not only to carry away from the Alexandria library, but the vast number of books which are now said to be his, but also to copy notes from a large number of volumes. Indeed, modern scholarship has shown that the writings of Aristotle bear all of the marks of hurriedly copied notes, which of course suggests that Aristotle himself copied these notes from the books of the Alexandrian library. The historical account of Aristotle's life is incredible. It was the custom of the ancient armies to capture books as a valuable war booty. When a vicious army takes possession of a country, it is customary for special companies to search for and seize war booty, to help themselves to everything that is considered valuable. The Greeks among all the surrounding nations were the most anxious to obtain the valuable secrets of the Egyptians in the ancient sciences, and it would appear that the greatest opportunity came to them to accomplish the desire when Alexander the Great invaded Egypt. As stated elsewhere, ancient invaded armies looted libraries because of the great value attached to books, and temples were also looted, not only for books, but also for the gold and silver out of which the gods and ceremonial vessels were made. The education of the Egyptian priests according to their orders, from Diodorus, Herodotus, and Clement of Alexandria, we learn that there were 6 orders of Egyptian priests, and that each order had to master a certain number of books of Hermes. Clement has described a procession of the priests, calling them by their order and stating their qualifications as follows. First comes the singer Otis, bearing an instrument of music. He has to know by heart 2 of the books of Hermes, one containing the hymns of God, and the other the allotment of the king's life. Next comes the horoscopus, carrying in his hand a horologium or sundial and a palm branch, the symbols of astronomy. He has to know 4 of the books of Hermes, which deal with astronomy. Next comes the hierogramma, with feathers on his head, and a book in his hand, and a rectangular case with writing materials, the writing ink, and the reed. He has to know the hieroglyphics, cosmography, geography, astronomy, and topography of Egypt, the sacred utensils and measures, the temple's furniture, and the lands. Next come the stolites, carrying the cubit of justice and the libation vessels. He has to know the books of Hermes that deal with the slaughter of animals. Next come the prophetess, carrying the vessels of water, followed by those who carry the loaves. The prophetess is the president of the temple and has to know the 10 books which are called heretic, and contains the laws and doctrines concerning the gods and the whole education of the priests. The book of Hermes are 42 in number and are absolutely necessary. 36 of them have to be known by the orders which precede and contain the whole philosophy of the Egyptians. The remaining 6 books must be known by the order of Pastafori. There are medical books and deal with physiology, male and female diseases, anatomy, drugs, and instruments. The books of Hermes were well known to the ancient world and were taken to Clement of Alexandria, who lived in the beginning of the 3rd century AD. In addition to the education contained in the 42 books of Hermes, the priests gained considerable knowledge from the selection and examination of sacrificial victims, and the strict bodily purity which their priestly office imposed. In addition to the hierogrammat and the horoscopers, who were skilled in theology and hieroglyphics, a priest also a judge and interpreter of the law. This led to a select tribunal which made and interpreted the law. This led to a select tribunal which made the Egyptian priest the custodian of every kind of literature. We are also told that the science of statistics was cultivated to the greatest perfection among the Egyptian priests. As have already been pointed out, in connection with Plato and the cardinal virtues, the Egyptian mysteries were the center of organized culture and the recognized source of education in the ancient world. Neophytes were graded according to their moral efficiency and intellectual competence, and had to submit to many years of tests and ordeals in order that their eligibility for advancement might be determined. Their education included 7 liberal arts and virtues. The virtues were mere abstractions or ethical sentiments, but positive valors and the fertility of the soul. Beyond these, the priest centered upon a course of specialization. The education of the Egyptian priests consisted also in the specialization in secret systems of language and mathematical symbolism. It would appear that there were 2 forms of writing in use among the Egyptians. A, the Demotic, believed to have been introduced by Pharaoh Thutmose for trade and commercial purposes, and the hieroglyphics, of which there were 2 forms, the hieroglyphics proper and the hieratic and linear form, both of which were used by the priests in order to conceal the secret and mystical meaning of their doctrine. We are also informed that the mystery systems of Egypt employed modes of spoken language which could be understood only by the initiated. These consisted not only of myths and parables, but also of a secret language called Senzon. We also understand that the Egyptians attached numerical values both to letters of words and to geometrical figures, with the same intention as with their use of hieroglyphics to conceal their teachings. It is further understood that the Egyptian numerical and geometrical symbolisms were contained in the 42 books of Hermes, whose system was the oldest and most elaborate repository of mathematical symbolism. Here again, we are reminded of the source of the number philosophy of Pythagoras. The education of the Egyptian priests consisted also in the specialization of magic. According to Herodotus, the Egyptian priests possessed supernatural powers, for they had been trained in esoteric philosophy of the greater mysteries and were experts in magic. They had the power of controlling the minds of men, hypnosis, the power of predicting the future, prophecy, and the power over nature by giving commands in the name of the divinity and accomplishments of great deeds. Herodotus also tells us that the most celebrated oracles of the ancient world were located in Egypt: Hercules and Canopus, Apollonopolis, Magna, Minerva at Sais, Diana at Bubastis, Mars at Papremis, and Jupiter at Thebes and Ammonium. And the great Greek oracles were Egyptian initiates. And that the Greek oracles were Egyptian initiates. And the Greek oracles were Egyptian imitations. Here it might be well known to mention that the Egyptian priests were the first genuine priests of history who exercised control over the laws of nature. Here it might also be well known to mention that the Egyptian Book of the Dead is a book of magical formulae and instructions intended to direct the fate of the departed soul. It was the prayer book of the mystery systems of Egypt, and the Egyptian priests received training in post-mortem conditions and the methods of their verification. It must also be noted that magic was applied religion or primitive scientific method. In addition to the foundation training ascribed for all neophytes, those who sought holy orders had to be versed in the books of Hermes, and according to Clement of Alexandria, their orders and subjects were as follows: the singer or otis, who must know the book of Hermes dealing with music, the hymns of the gods; the horoscopist, who must know the 4 books of Hermes dealing with astronomy; the hierogrammet, who must know the hieroglyphics, cosmology, geography, astronomy, and topography of Egypt and land surveying; the stolites, who must know the books of Hermes that deals with slaughter of animals and the process of embalming; the prophetess, who is the president of the temple and must know the 10 books of Hermes dealing with higher esoteric theology and the whole education of priests; the pastophori, who must know 6 books of Hermes, which are medical books dealing with physiology, the disease of male and female, anatomy, drugs, and instruments; the science of the monuments, architecture, masonry, carpentry, engineering, sculpture, metallurgy, agriculture, mining and forestry, art, and the secret sciences, numerical symbolism, geometrical symbolism, magic, the book of the dead, myths and parables, the social order and its protection. The priests of Egypt were also lawyers, judges, officials of government, businessmen and sailors and captains. Hence they must have been trained in economics, civics, law, government, statistics, census taking, navigation, shipbuilding, military science, the manufacture of chariots, and horse breeding. If we compare 3A with 3B, which immediately follows, we would discover that the curriculum of the Egyptian mystery system covered a much wider range of scientific subjects than those of Aristotle's list, which includes the book of the foundation of the temple by MOPOWERZ, a short history of mathematics, the problem of obelisk, the Great Pyramid is divine message, the 7 liberal arts, the quadrivium and the trivium originated from the Egyptian mysteries. Theoretic, whose purpose was truth and which included A, mathematics, B, physics, and C, theology. Practical, whose purpose was usefulness and which included ethics, economics, and politics. poetic or productive, whose purpose was beauty, and which included A, poetry, B, art, and C, rhetoric. An examination and comparison of 3A with 3B shows that the curriculum of the Egyptian mystery systems included all of the scientific and philosophic subjects credited with the authorship of Aristotle. The books attributed to Aristotle's authorship cannot be disassociated from the Egyptian origin and elsewhere referred to, but through the plunder of the Royal Library of Alexandria and through research carried on at the center of Aristotle himself. As has been mentioned elsewhere, the writings of Aristotle are disputed by modern scholarship, and I feel more justified in making the comparison between the curriculum of the mystery system and the list said to be drawn up by Aristotle himself, rather than the notorious list of 1,000 books whose subjects are nevertheless included under the curriculum of the Egyptian mystery systems. The Memphite theology is an inscription on a stone, now kept in the British Museum. It contains the theological, cosmological, and philosophical views of the Egyptian. It has already been referred to in my treatment of Plato's doctrines, but it must be repeated here to show its full importance as the basis of the entire field of Greek philosophy. It is dated 700 BC and bears the name of the Egyptian pharaoh who stated that he had copied an inscription of his ancestors. This statement is verified by language and typical arrangement of the text, and therefore assigns the original date of the Memphite theology to a very early period of Egyptian history, the time when the first dynasties had been their new capital at Memphis, the city of the god Ptah, between 4000 and 3500 BC. This consists of 3 supplementary parts, each of which will be treated separately, both as regards its teaching and the identity of Greek philosophy. Part 1 presents the gods of chaos. Part 2 presents the gods of order and arrangement in creation. And Part 3 presents the primate of the gods, or the God of gods, through whose creation was accomplished. In Part 1, pre-creation or chaos is represented as follows. A. Text part of 1. The primate god Ptah conceived in his heart everything that exists, and by his utterance created them all. He is the first to emerge from the primeval waters of Nun in the form of a primeval hill. Closely following the hill, the god Atum also emerges from the waters and sit upon Ptah. There remain in the waters 4 pairs of male and female gods, the O God, or unity of 8 gods, bearing the following names: Nun and Nunut, the primeval waters and the counter heaven; Hu and Huhet, the boundless and its opposites; Kuk and Kuket, darkness and its opposites; and Amun, the hidden and the opposite. Ptah has the following attributes: A. The primate of the gods, the god of gods, the Logos, thought and creative utterance and power; the god of order and form, the divine artificer and potter. It must be noted that while the sun god Atum sits upon Ptah, the primeval hill which accomplishes the work of creation, but the Memphite theology dates back to 4000 BC, when it is believed that the Greeks were unknown. The arrangement in the Memphite theology could only mean that the ingredients of the primeval chaos contain 10 principles, 4 pairs of opposite principles, together with 2 other gods, Ptah representing mind, thought, and creative utterance, while Atum joins himself to Ptah and acts as demiurge and executes the work of creation. From such an arrangement in the cosmos, we are in position to infer the following philosophies. A. Water is the source of all things. B. Creation was accomplished by the unity of 2 creative principles, Ptah and Atum. C. Adam, the demiurge or intermediate god in creation. He was also sun god or fire god. D. Opposite principles controlled the life of the universe. E. The elements in creation were fire, water, earth, and air. Part 1 of the Memphite theology is the correct source of these philosophies, but strangely the Greeks have claimed them as their production, although without any right whatsoever. C. Individual Greek philosophers to whom portions of the philosophy of the Memphite theology has been assigned. Of these doctrines, water, the source of all things, has been assigned to Thales. That of the boundless or unlimited has been assigned to Anaximander, while that of air as the basis of life has been assigned to Anaximenes. Furthermore, the doctrine, the fire underlines the life of the universe, has been assigned not only to Pythagoras, who spoke of the functions of the central and peripheral fires, but also to Heraclitus, who spoke on the transmutation of fire in the other elements and their transmutation back into fire. Also Democritus, who spoke of fire atoms as filling space as the mind or soul of the world, and Plato, who spoke of a world soul which is composed of fire atoms. Likewise, the doctrine of opposites has been assigned not only to Pythagoras, who spoke of the elements of the unit as odd and even, but also A. Heraclitus, who spoke of the unity of warring opposites. B. Parmenides, who spoke of the distinction between being and not being. And C. Socrates, who spoke of these things as being generated from their opposites. And D. Plato, who spoke of ideas and noumena as the real and perfect, but phenomenon as unreal and imperfect. Furthermore, the doctrines of the nous, mind, or an intelligent agency as responsible for creation, has been assigned not only to Anaxagoras, but also to Socrates, who spoke of the existence of useful things as they work of an intelligence, to Plato, who spoke of a world soul or mind as the cause of the life and knowledge in the universe, and to Democritus, who attached a similar meaning. Heraclitus, who spoke of fire as the logos or creative principle in nature, while the doctrine of the demiurge or the intermediate god who created the world has been assigned to Plato. The gods of order and arrangement in the cosmos are represented by 9 gods in one godhead called the Enad. Here, Adam, the source of the Ogdoad, is also retained as the source of the gods of order and arrangement. Adam names 4 pairs of parts of his own body and thus creates 8 gods who together with himself become 9. These 8 gods are created gods, the first creatures of this world, and Adam, the creator god, the demiurge of whom Plato spoke. The gods of Adam projected from his body were Shu, Tefnut, Geb, Nut, who are said to have given birth to 4 other gods, Osiris, Isis, Seth, and Nephthys. As we read the text part 2, we find that the sun god Adam, who was present in the chaos, was also present at the development of orderly arrangements in the cosmos. At this stage, Adam assumes the role of creator of all gods except Ptah, the god of gods. He next proceeds to accomplish his special type of creation in the following manner. He commands 8 gods to proceed from his own body according to the names of those 8 parts. The result of this creation presents us with what has been called the Enad, or the unity of 9 gods in one Godhead. The doctrine of the demiurge in part 1, the doctrine of the created gods, and the doctrine of the unmoved mover. Also, the doctrine of opposites and omnipotence and omniscience. Of these doctrines, that the Enad will be dealt with elsewhere, and since the doctrine of demiurge has already been treated together, with the created gods, I shall now discuss the doctrine of the unmoved mover, as based upon the same act of creation. According to the Memphite theology of the Egyptians, Adam created 8 gods who proceeded from the 8 parts of his body. He was seated upon Ptah the hill and was unmoved. In this act of creation, Adam became the unmoved mover. In spite of the Memphite theology being the direct source of the doctrines, yet Plato has been given credit for the doctrine of the created gods, while Aristotle has received credit for that of the unmoved mover. Certainly, the world has never been more misled. Here it must be made quite clear that the doctrine of the demiurge in creation includes 2 other doctrines, that of the created gods and that of the unmoved mover. It was the function of the demiurge to create the universe, and in doing so, his first act was the creation of the gods, who accordingly became the first creatures. But the manner in which the demiurge created the gods was the process of projecting them from his own body. This method of creation clearly makes the demiurge the unmoved mover. However, the history of Greek philosophy has assigned the authorship of the doctrine of the demiurge and the created gods to Plato, and the authorship of the doctrine of the unmoved mover to Aristotle. But this so-called Platonic doctrine is one made up of 3 inseparable parts: A, the demiurge; B, the function of the demiurge; and C, the method of the function, a unity which contradicts Aristotle's authorship of what really only an inference from the supposed original doctrine of Plato. The doctrine of opposites has been discussed. However, in part 1 of the Memphite theology, one of the pairs of the created gods, Osiris and Isis was used to represent the male and female principles of nature. In addition to this, Osiris had other qualities attached to him, which might be understood from the following derivatives: A, Ash meaning many, and B, Iri meaning to do, and also C, meaning an eye. Consequently, Osiris came to mean not only eyed or omniscient, but also omnipotent or all-powerful. Here again, as in all instances already mentioned, in spite of the fact that the Memphis theology is the source of Greek philosophy, yet the doctrine of all intelligent cause, a nous, as responsible for the life and conduct of the world, has been assigned to Anaxagoras, Socrates, and also Plato, whose world soul consisted of fire atoms, like the world soul of Democritus. In this part of the Memphite theology, which is part 3, the primate of the god is represented by Ptah, thought, logos, and creative power, which are exercised over all creatures. He transmits power and spirit to all gods and controls the lives of all things, animals and men, through his thought and commands. In other words, it is him that all things live, move, and have their eternal being. The philosophy of part 3, we infer the following doctrines. All things were created by the thought and command of Ptah, the god of gods. Through the thought and commands of Ptah we live, move, and have our eternal being. Ptah is creator and preserver, and has already been pointed out elsewhere. Ptah's power were transmitted by magical means to Adam, who performed the work of creation. Just as the Memphite theology is the source of Greek philosophy or primitive science, so it is also the basis of modern scientific belief. The gods of order and arrangement in the cosmos are represented by 9 gods in the Godhead, called the Enad. Adam, the sun god, fire god, creates 8 other gods by naming 4 parts of his own body from which they came forth. Here the names of the created gods were given, such as Shu and Tefnut, Geb and Nut, and 2 other pairs of opposites, Osiris and Isis, and Seth and Nephthys, who are supposed to be the first creatures of this world. Now, if we compare this Egyptian cosmology with the nebular hypotheses of Laplace, we will find very striking similarities in the two contexts. According to the nebular hypothesis, our present solar system was once a molten gaseous nebula. This nebula rotated at an enormous speed, and as the mass cooled down, it also contracted and developed greater speed. The result was a bulging at the equator and a gradual breaking off of the gaseous rings, which formed themselves into planets. These planets in turn threw off gaseous rings, which formed themselves into smaller bodies, until at last the sun was left as the remnant of the original parent nebula. From this context, it is clear that the original parent nebula was fire or the sun, and that by throwing off parts of itself, it created some planets, which in turn threw off parts of themselves and created others. According to the context of the Memphite theology, the creator God was the sun god or fire god of Adam, who named 4 parts of his own body from which the gods came forth. By Adam, together with the 8 created gods, imposed the Enad or Godhead of 9, a very striking similarity with modern science, which teaches that there are 9 major planets. We may now summarize these summaries. A. The creator God in both the Egyptian and modern cosmologies is the sun or fire. B. The creator God in both cosmologies creates gods from parts of himself. C. The number of gods are 9 and correspond with 9 major planets. These similarities make it evident that Laplace obtained his hypotheses from the Memphite theology or other Egyptian sources. Of course, the Memphite theology, according to Frankfurt in his intellectual adventure of ancient man, does not mention the creation of planets. Nevertheless, it was the method of the Egyptian to conceal the truth by the use of myths, parables, and magical principles, numbers of philosophy, and hieroglyphics. We can easily see what methods might be involved before we could arrive at a better translation of the Memphite theology. At any rate, the entire setting of the Memphite theology is astronomical, and what could be more natural than to expect an astronomical interpretation? It seems well within reason to regard the Enad as the heliocentric system of history, Adam, the sun god, creating 8 other gods or planets from his own body as the unmoved mover, a teaching which has been falsely attributed to Aristotle. B. The identity between the Egyptian sun god Adam and the Adam of modern science. There are 2 things which I desire to point out in connection with the relationship between Adam, the Egyptian sun god, and the Adam of modern science. These things are the similarity of attributes and the similarity of names. The Egyptian god Adam means self-created, everything and nothing, a combination of positive and negative principles, all-inclusiveness and emptiness, a demiurge possessing creative powers, the creator, the sun. Adam also means the all and not yet being. As a god, Adam represents the principles of opposites, the atoms and the substratum of matter, according to Greek philosophy, is identified by Democritus as movement of that which is to within that which is not. It therefore represents the principle of opposites and shows the identity between the Egyptian sun god and the substratum of matter. Furthermore, the atom is defined as the full and void, being and not being, and these definitions coincide with the everything and nothing, that the all-inclusiveness and emptiness of the Egyptian sun god. The similarity of names shared by the Egyptian sun god and the atoms of science. Now, in reference to the similarity of these 2 names, the first thing we should bear in mind is that the fact they both possess identical attributes, as has been already pointed out in sections, and consequently we are forced to conclude that the atom of science is the identical name of the Egyptian sun god, the most ancient of the gods except Ptah, who was present with Adam at creation. The second thing we should bear in mind is the fact that the name of the second god, Adam, belongs to the cosmology of the Memphite theology, whose date goes back to 4000 BC when the Greeks were not even known. Consequently, we are forced to conclude that the Greeks obtained both the original name and the attributes of the sun god from the Egyptians. Furthermore, the Greeks were unacquainted with the Egyptians and their language during the period of the so-called Greek philosophy, dating from the 6th century BC, and as a consequence, transliterated Egyptian words into Greek without regard to their Coptic derivatives. The following Homeric stories verify the practice of the Greeks in the transliteration of Egyptian words and the plagiarism of their legends. According to Homer, Proteus was a maritime divinity feeding his phocae on the coast of Egypt. He was endowed with the gift of prophecy, which was exercised only upon compulsion. Proteus, however, an Egyptian pharaoh who succeeded to the throne on the death of Pharaoh, the son of Sesostris, Proteus was also worshipped at Memphis. The Greeks not only transliterate the name of this Egyptian king, but also plagiarize on the legend. Likewise, the story of Lo, the Argive princess, who was changed into a heifer, and after long wanderings reached Egypt, where she gave birth to a god, and where she herself worshipped as a goddess, Isis, points clearly to the introduction of the worship of Isis or Athor under the symbol of the heifer, and at an earlier period into Argos. Here it must be pointed out that Lo is the Coptic name for moon, and the same word was preserved as the dialect of Argos without any affinity with Greek root. It was a habit of the Greeks to Hellenize Egyptian words by transliterating them and adding them to the Greek vocabulary. This practice of borrowing words from nearby nations continued until New Testament times. In Acts of the Apostles of the Greek Testament, chapter 13 and verse 1, the word Niger, meaning black man, in the name Simeon, the Negro, is a Roman or Latin word. Black, Simeon, of course, was an Egyptian professor attached to the church at Rome. The Adam of Science is really the name of the Egyptian sun god that has come down to modern times through the so-called Greek philosophy and carries identical attributes with the sun god. It must be remembered that we erroneously call Greek philosophy was the beginning of science or the investigation of nature, and consequently we could not separate modern science from Greek philosophy. The Greeks derived the meaning of the atom from alpha, a negative prefix meaning not, and the present initiative active of timo, to cut, the two derivatives together meaning that which cannot be cut. For centuries the world has been misled by the misconception of the Greeks, a fact which no doubt has impeded the progress of atomic research by Western scholars who had been in the so-called Greek origin of philosophy or primitive science. However, today the Greek conception of the atom is no longer tenable, since modern science has successfully split the atom. Great scientific secrets in the Memphite theology yet to be discovered. I believe that the time has come within which man will be able to unlock most of the secrets of nature hereto hidden and unknown. I have shown in the nebular hypotheses of modern times coincides with the teachings of the Memphite theology, of which the sun god Adam is said to have been created with 8 other gods, which together with himself constitute the Enid of the Egyptians, which corresponds to the 9 major planets of modern scientific teaching. We also know that out of cosmic chaos, there arose from the primeval waters a pair of gods, the primeval hill, a Adam and sun god, and that through the contact of Adam and the hill, he received power to create the other 8 major planets. This seems to imply that atomic energy originates from water and earth, since water, H2O, and uranium, an indispensable ingredient in atomic energy, is found in the bowels of the earth. Note that both Adam and the hill came out of the primeval waters. 4 parts of gods, representing positive and negative principles, still remain in water in the form of male and female frogs and snakes, and constitutes 4/5 of the secrets of creation which man has yet fathomed. Successful scientific research in the principles and secrets of nature lies in the study of Memphite theology, whose symbology requires the key of magical principles for its interpretation. With this approach, our men of science should be able to unlock the doors of secrets of nature and become the custodians of unlimited knowledge. This is the legacy of the African continent to the nations of the world. She has laid the cultural foundations of modern progress. Therefore, she and her people deserve the honor and praise for centuries have been falsely given to the Greeks. And likewise, it is the purpose of this book to make the revelation of the beginning of a universal reformation in race relations, which I believe would be the beginning of the solution of the problem of universal unrest.
We rocking more powers. Up jumps the boogie to the bang bang boogie. Up jumps the boogie to the bang bang boogie. We rocking more powers. We rocking more powers. 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 Up jumps the boogie to the bang bang boogie. I cut off your head, nigga. One time for your mind, this is what I said, nigga. You see red. More powers. More powers. More powers. More powers.